The garden and the glimpse. The morning sun, still gentle, warmed Ilara's back as she knelt among the rows of nascent green. Her fingers, calloused but nimble, coaxed stray weeds from the damp earth around young lettuce shoots. The rich scent of soil and damp foliage filled the air, a familiar balm. Here, in the family garden, life unfolded with a steady, predictable rhythm she'd known since childhood. Each planted seed, each tended sprout, was a tiny promise, a quiet testament to enduring faith and hard work. This garden was more than just sustenance. It was a living chronicle of her family's years, each furrow tilled by generations before her. A warm hand settled on her shoulder, and Ilara looked up to see Sarah, her mother, a faint smudge of flour on her apron. "The pie crust is ready, love," Sarah said, her voice soft as the morning breeze. "Could you bring in some of those strawberries?" Ilara nodded, her smile mirroring her mother's. "Just finishing these up." The bond between them was one of unspoken understanding, a tapestry woven with shared tasks and silent comforts. Sarah's eyes, deep and knowing, held a gentle strength that Ilara admired. As Ilara gathered the plump, ruby-red strawberries into a woven basket, Anna, her younger sister, darted into the garden, her braids bouncing. "Mama says we can have a little taste before the pies," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with childish delight. Anna, with her innocent curiosity, often reminded Ilara of a fawn, easily startled but always eager for joy. "Only a few now," Ilara cautioned gently, handing Anna a berry. She watched her sister pop it into her mouth, a sticky red stain appearing at the corner of her lips. The sight brought a pang of affection, a desire to protect this simple happiness. Later, as the sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows, Jakob, her father, strode into the garden, his broad shoulders filling the narrow path. His presence was always a solid, undeniable force, like the sturdy oak by the barn. "Ilara," he rumbled, his voice gravelly but not unkind. "The fence needs mending by the pasture." The winter storms loosened a few posts. "Yes, Dad," Ilara replied, rising. She knew his requests were not mere suggestions, but directives, rooted in his responsibility for their land and their livelihood. Jakob's love for his family was expressed through his tireless provision, his unwavering commitment to their way of life. His sternness was born of a deep-seated fear, a fear of anything that might threaten the integrity of their community, their faith. She worked alongside him for a while, securing the loose posts, the rhythmic thud of the hammer against wood a familiar sound. He spoke little, his concentration solely on the task at hand. Ilara understood that this shared labor was their language, a communion deeper than words. She appreciated the quiet competence of his hands, the way he seemed to know instinctively where strength was needed. As they finished, Jakob surveyed their work, a faint nod of approval, her only acknowledgement. "Good," he said, then turned and walked back towards the barn, his boots crunching on the gravel path. Ilara lingered by the pasture fence, her gaze drawn beyond the neatly tilled fields, past the familiar woods, to a sliver of asphalt glinting in the distance. The English road. It was a faint, almost imperceptible line against the horizon, yet it held an undeniable pull, a whisper of a world she knew only through rumor and fleeting glimpses. A world of speed, of different sounds, of lives lived on paths diverging from her own. A strange, unnamed yearning stirred within her, a subtle disquiet that settled like a stone in her chest. It wasn't discontent. Not exactly. More a quiet curiosity, a question mark etched into the landscape of her soul. Her life here was rich with purpose, deep with connection, yet that distant road represented a path untaken, a song unheard. The thought was fleeting, a shadow passing over the sun, quickly dismissed. She had her garden, her family, her faith. These were her roots, her anchors. But the glimpse of that road, however brief, left a faint, lingering echo in the quiet chambers of her heart. She turned from the fence, the basket of strawberries forgotten by her feet, and walked slowly back towards the warmth of the farmhouse, where the scent of baking pies now mingled with the earthy aroma of the garden. The sounds of Sarah humming a hymn from the kitchen and Anna's playful chatter drifted on the breeze, pulling her back into the familiar embrace of home. Market day encounters. The scent of freshly tilled earth and sun-warmed berries still clung to Alara's apron as the family buggy rattled along the familiar dirt road towards the market. Jakob held the reins, his gaze fixed ahead, a silent pillar of strength. Sarah, beside him, hummed a soft, wordless tune, her hands already busy with a mending basket. Alara and Anna sat facing backwards, surrounded by baskets brimming with scarlet strawberries, crisp green beans, and plump, ripe tomatoes. Hand-stitched quilts, their colors muted yet rich, were folded neatly beside them, along with intricate lacework crafted by the women during long winter evenings. The market was a tapestry of sounds and smells. The low murmur of conversation, the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones, the earthy aroma of root vegetables mingling with the sweet perfume of baked goods. Across the bustling square, Daniel leaned against a weathered lamppost, a sketchpad clutched loosely in his hand. He wasn't sketching, though. His eyes, keen and observant, swept over the vibrant scene. The Amish market, held every Tuesday and Friday, was a pocket of serene timelessness amidst the hurried modern world. He found a peculiar solace in its unhurried pace, the honest labor, the lack of pretension. He admired the sturdy practicality of the buggies, the plain but elegant clothing, the quiet dignity of the people. He often came, ostensibly for the fresh produce, but in truth, a deeper, less tangible draw pulled him here. He spotted them then, the distinctive black buggy, the neat straw hats. Jakob, his face a landscape of etched lines, began unloading the heavier crates, while Sarah arranged the quilts with practiced ease. Anna, a smaller echo of Alara, carefully placed jars of preserves on a wooden trestle table. And Alara. She moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the heavy baskets she carried. Her head bowed slightly, dark bonnet framing her serene profile. She knelt to arrange the berries, her fingers delicate as she plucked stray leaves, her movements economical and precise. Daniel felt the familiar, gentle tug in his chest. Their stall was soon a hub of activity. Shoppers gravitated towards the vibrant display, their voices a continuous hum. Ilara, her hands busy, offered quiet greetings, her voice soft as a rustle of leaves. She weighed tomatoes, counted out beans, her gaze mostly downcast, but occasionally, briefly, lifting to meet a customer's eyes. Daniel waited, not wanting to appear overly eager, yet unable to tear his gaze away. He bought a loaf of artisanal bread from a non-Amish baker, then lingered near a flower stall, pretending to examine a potted geranium. He watched as a woman haggled good-naturedly over the price of a quilt, and a young boy, no older than Anna, proudly presented a hand-carved wooden bird. The market throbbed with life, a testament to community and sustenance. Finally, he made his way towards Ilara's stall. He picked up a small basket of strawberries, their crimson hue almost iridescent in the morning sun. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. Ilara's head lifted, her eyes, the color of rich earth, met his. For a fleeting instant, the world outside their small transaction seemed to recede. A faint blush touched her cheeks, a subtle bloom against her fair skin. "Good morning," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, yet clear. "These look wonderful," Daniel said, holding up the basket. His gaze lingered on her, not overtly, but with an unspoken depth that Alara felt keenly. She quickly looked down, her hands moving to weigh the berries. "They are ripe," she offered, her fingers brushing the worn scales. He paid her. their fingers touching briefly as he handed over the coins. A small spark, an electric current, seemed to pass between them, quickly extinguished as she withdrew her hand. "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice a little softer than before. He paused, wanting to say more, to prolong the moment, but the invisible boundaries were clear. He knew the unspoken rules, the respect owed to their way of life. Ilara nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible dip of her head. Her eyes, when they met his again, held a question, a flicker of something unreadable, before she turned to assist another customer. Daniel walked away, the basket of strawberries in his hand, but his mind was still at the stall, replaying the brief encounter. The quiet grace of her movements, the fleeting blush, the depth in her eyes. It all resonated within him. He knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and sobered him, that she was more than just a passing fascination. And he knew, with equal clarity, the immense chasm that lay between their worlds. He glanced back, seeing her once more immersed in her duties, a small, yet significant figure in the vibrant market square. The strawberries suddenly felt heavy in his hand, a sweet burden. He understood, then, that this was not merely about berries or market day. It was about something far more profound and far more challenging. A broken engine, a shared secret. The clatter started subtly, a rhythmic tap-tap from beneath the hood of Daniel's aging sedan. He'd been driving aimlessly, the image of Ilara's serene face still vivid in his mind, the memory of her quiet smile a constant warmth. He'd told himself he was just enjoying the countryside, but the truth was, he'd been hoping to catch another glimpse of her, perhaps on her way back from the market. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, then a harsh grind, followed by a final guttural cough. The car shuddered, then died, coasting silently to a halt on the narrow gravel-shouldered road. He swore under his breath, leaning his head against the steering wheel. Of all the places for his temperamental vehicle to give up the ghost, it had to be on an isolated stretch of road, miles from the nearest town. And, he realized with a jolt, suspiciously close to the cluster of barns and neat white farmhouse he'd passed earlier, the one that had felt distinctly like Ilara's. He popped the hood, releasing a plume of acrid smoke, and peered into the oily depths. A quick assessment confirmed his worst fears. Whatever had broken, it wasn't a simple fix. He'd been wrestling with a stubborn hose clamp, his hands already smeared with grease, when he heard the clip-clop of hooves. He straightened, wiping his brow with the back of a hand, and watched as a black buggy, drawn by a sturdy brown horse, approached. His heart gave a peculiar lurch as he recognized the figure holding the reins. Ilara. Her face, framed by her bonnet, held an expression of mild surprise, quickly softening into something akin to concern. She pulled the buggy to a halt a few yards away. "Are you all right, English?" she asked, her voice a soft melody against the chirping cicadas. Daniel managed a wry smile. "My car, I'm afraid, is not. Seems to have given up the ghost." Ilara surveyed the smoking engine with a knowing glance. "Looks like it. You are a ways from town." She paused, her gaze flicking towards the setting sun. "It will be dark soon. You cannot stay here." He knew that. The road was barely wide enough for one buggy, let alone a broken-down car and a stranded man. "I appreciate the thought, but I wouldn't want to impose." Her gaze held his, unwavering. "It is no imposition to offer aid to one in need. My father would insist. Though," she hesitated, her eyes darting towards the nearby farmhouse, "it might be best if you waited in the old springhouse. It's cool and out of sight. I can fetch you some water, and perhaps father can look at your engine in the morning." Daniel understood. Her offer of help was genuine, but her community's rules about interaction with outsiders were strict. The springhouse was a secluded spot, discreet. "That's very kind of you, Ilara," he said, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the engine's lingering heat. He gathered his few belongings, and with a surprisingly strong pull, Ilara helped him push his dead car off the narrow road and into a small, overgrown verge. Then, she led him down a winding, barely visible path through a copse of trees, the air growing cooler with every step. The spring house was a small stone structure, nestled beside a gurgling stream, almost entirely hidden by thick ivy. Inside, it was indeed cool and dark, smelling of damp earth and fresh water. She set down a lantern, its soft glow illuminating the rough-hewn walls. "I will bring you some bread and cheese," she said, her voice hushed. "And blankets, if you need them. It gets cold at night." She turned to leave, then hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the wooden bucket by the spring. Are you from far away?" The question, so simple, felt momentous. It was an invitation, a tentative step across the divide. "From the city, a few hours west," Daniel replied, settling onto a smooth stone bench. "I came to see the market, and, well, I guess I just kept driving." He met her eyes. "I enjoyed our talk about the strawberries." A faint blush touched her cheeks. She lowered her gaze, then looked up again, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "It is different in the city. Do people often speak to strangers like that?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But it's not often you meet someone who makes you want to stop and listen." The air hummed with unspoken things. He found himself wanting to tell her everything about his life, his work, the small, solitary world he inhabited. He imagined her reaction, her quiet questions, her thoughtful silences. Ilara, for her part, seemed to be wrestling with something. She glanced towards the door, then back at him, a flicker of something almost defiant in her expression. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. Instead, she asked, "What do you do in the city?" It was a question that broke another small invisible barrier, and Daniel, sensing the delicate balance of their shared secret, began to speak. Worlds intertwined. The days that followed wove themselves into a secret tapestry, each thread spun from stolen moments. Daniel's car remained stubbornly immobile, a convenient excuse that bought them time. Ilara, with a quiet ingenuity, found ways to slip away, her chores often stretching into the late afternoon, or her foraging trips veering deeper into the woods than usual. Their rendezvous point became a sun-dappled glade beside a meandering creek, where the murmur of water provided a natural screen against prying ears. Here, amidst the rustling leaves and the scent of damp earth, their worlds began to intertwine. Daniel painted vivid pictures with his words, of bustling city streets, towering buildings that pierced the clouds, and the electrifying hum of a life lived unbound by tradition. He spoke of his art, not as a craft, but as an extension of his soul, a voice through which he expressed the kaleidoscope of human emotion. He described galleries filled with abstract canvases, music venues pulsing with raw energy, and the intoxicating freedom of choosing one's own path, unbound by community expectation. "You can be anything, Ilara," he'd say, his eyes alight. "Do anything. The world is limitless." Ilara listened, rapt, her hands often idly weaving blades of grass into intricate patterns. Her own narratives were softer, steeped in the rhythms of the land and the unwavering tenets of her faith. She spoke of the comfort found in communal labor, the quiet strength of shared belief, and the deep roots of family that anchored her to her heritage. She described barn raisings, where laughter mingled with the clang of hammers, Sunday services where hymns rose in pure harmony, and the unspoken understanding that bound her people together. "Our freedom," she explained softly, her gaze drifting to the canopy above, "comes from knowing our place, from living in God's grace and serving Him through our simple lives." She spoke of her siblings, Jacob and Anna, and the tender bond she shared with her parents, their wisdom a quiet constant in her life. She never spoke of her own yearnings, But Daniel saw them reflected in her intense gaze, in the slight tremor of her fingers as she absorbed his words. He, in turn, found a profound beauty in her descriptions, a quiet dignity that resonated deeply. The simplicity of her life, far from appearing restrictive, seemed to possess a rare authenticity he'd often sought in his own world. He admired the unwavering conviction in her voice, the serene confidence she drew from her faith. He began to see not just the Amish woman, but the soul beneath, vibrant and questioning, yet deeply rooted. One afternoon, as the setting sun painted the western sky in hues of orange and purple, Daniel found a smooth, flat stone and began to sketch. He drew her, first subtly, then with growing confidence, capturing the curve of her cheek, the gentle sweep of her lashes. He showed her the drawing, a portrait that perfectly captured the quiet intensity in her eyes. Elara gasped, a rare, uninhibited sound. "It's me," she whispered, tracing the lines with a reverent finger. "But more." Their conversations deepened, traversing the chasm between their upbringing. He learned about the Ordnung, the unwritten rules that governed her life, and the profound meaning behind humility and separation from the worldly. She learned about ambition, self-expression, and the dizzying array of choices that defined his existence. With each shared secret, each whispered confession, the invisible threads binding them grew stronger, tighter. The air between them crackled with an unspoken longing. A brush of hands, accidental at first, became lingering touches. A shared glance stretched into a moment charged with emotion. One evening, as twilight bled into the woods, Daniel reached out, gently cupping her face. Her skin was soft, warm beneath his palm. Her breath hitched, her eyes wide, reflecting the dappled moonlight. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with a growing urgency, a silent testament to the undeniable force pulling their disparate worlds together. It was a kiss that tasted of forbidden fruit and nascent dreams, a promise whispered in the quiet heart of the woods, far from the watchful eyes of her community, the weight of choice. The sharp night air, usually a soothing caress, now cinched around Elara's chest like a tightening band. Moonlight, a fractured silver through the small window, striated the rustic floorboards of her room. Sleep, once a soft descent into oblivion, offered no such grace. Her mind snagged repeatedly on the forbidden kiss, the urgent press of Daniel's mouth, the electric current that had jolted through her. It was a sensation utterly foreign to her meticulously ordered existence, yet undeniably captivating. Each night, she wrestled with the vivid memory of Daniel's earnest face, his eyes holding an entire cosmos she was only just beginning to decipher. Then, with a sickening jolt, her thoughts would rebound to the familiar, comforting murmur of her family's evening prayers, the wholesome scent of baking bread, the steady cadence of Amish life. How could she reconcile the fierce longing Daniel ignited with the deep-rooted fealty she owed her family, her faith, her very self? The choice felt less like a crossroads and more like a yawning chasm tearing her spirit in two. Her heart throbbed with an ache far keener than any physical wound. By day, Elara moved through her duties with an almost robotic precision. Her hands kneaded dough, scoured floors, and mended garments. But her essence felt unmoored, suspended somewhere between the familiar fields of her farm and the vibrant, bustling streets Daniel had described. Sarah, her mother, a woman whose insights were often as gentle as her touch, registered the subtle alterations. Elara's laughter, once unrestrained and bright, was now subdued, sometimes entirely absent. Her gaze frequently drifted towards the horizon, a distant haze clouding her usually clear eyes. One afternoon, as Sarah meticulously mended a tear in Jacob's workshirt, the quiet whir of her sewing machine punctuated only by the remote caw of a crow, she spoke, her voice soft as a rustle of leaves. "Elara, you seem withdrawn these days. Is your heart troubled?" Ilara stiffened, her hands freezing above a basket of freshly picked beans. No, ma'am. Just much to ponder. The lie felt ponderous and brittle on her tongue. Sarah nodded slowly, her needle weaving intricate patterns in the fabric. The world can be a heavy place, even for a young heart. If there is a burden you carry, remember, we are here to share it. Her eyes, warm and knowing, met Ilara's for a moment, an unspoken invitation to confide. Ilara could only manage a fragile smile before returning to her beans, the unuttered words a palpable weight in the air between them. Later that week, at the lively market in Lancaster, Jacob observed Ilara from across their stall. He noted the way she handled the produce, her movements efficient, yet devoid of their usual vitality. He caught a flash of something akin to wistfulness in her eyes, as a young English couple, hand in hand, chuckled while passing by. Jacob was a man of few words, his strength often manifested through his quiet diligence and unwavering presence. But his concern for his eldest daughter was a deep, silent current flowing beneath his calm exterior. He recalled the joyous exuberance of her childhood, the way she'd chase Anna through the fields, her laughter echoing. Now, a quietude had settled over her, a thoughtful solemnity that felt both mature and disquieting. He loaded the last crate of heirloom tomatoes onto the buggy, his gaze lingering on Ilara as she exchanged a few polite words with a customer. Her future, he had always envisioned, was clearly defined. A good Amish husband, a home within the community, children learning the traditions of their people. But recently, a faint, unsettling doubt had begun to form, like a hairline fracture in a perfectly smooth stone. He saw the subtle hints, the less focused gaze, the way she'd sometimes hum a tune he didn't recognize. These were minor things, yet they accumulated, painting a portrait of a heart drawn somewhere beyond the familiar confines of their world. He worried not of rebellion, but of a quiet, profound bereavement, the loss of the daughter he knew, the loss of her place within the life they cherished. As he climbed into the buggy, the setting sun casting long shadows across the market square, the weight of his unspoken fears settled heavily upon him, a proposal and a precipice. The scent of damp earth and pine needles clung to Ilara as she walked, a familiar balm that usually soothed her spirit. Today, it felt like a heavy cloak, muffling her thoughts, but failing to quiet the frantic beating of her heart. Every glance at the path ahead seemed to conjure Daniel's earnest face, his whispered words, the lingering ghost of his lips on hers. A week had passed since that forbidden moment, a week spent in a haze of guilt and longing. She knew, with a certainty, that both thrilled and terrified her, that their next meeting would bring a reckoning. She found him by the old maple, its branches stretching like gnarled hands against the bruised twilight sky. He stood, silhouetted, a figure of compelling grace, and her breath hitched. As she approached, his gaze met hers, a silent question passing between them. He took her hands, his touch warm and firm, a stark contrast to the trembling in her own. "Ilara," he began, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "I haven't stopped thinking about you. About us." He paused, searching her eyes, and she felt a sudden, dizzying pull towards him. "This past week, I've realized something profound. I love you, Ilara, more than I ever thought possible." The words hung in the air, sweet and dangerous. Ilara's mind reeled. She had expected affection, perhaps even a declaration of deep feeling, but love. It was a word laden with irreversible implications, a force capable of tearing down the very foundations of her existence. Daniel's grip tightened, his thumbs tracing patterns on her skin. "I know this is sudden, and I know what it means for you, but I can't imagine a future without you in it. A real future. With me." He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling visibly. "Ilara, leave this place. Come with me. We can build a life together, away from here." We can be free to love each other openly, without fear. A deafening roar filled Alara's ears, eclipsing the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a whip-poor will. Her world, meticulously constructed and deeply cherished, swayed precariously on the edge of a precipice. Leave. Leave her family, her community, the fields she had tilled since childhood, the hymns that were woven into the fabric of her soul. The thought was a violation, an impossible betrayal. Her eyes, wide with shock, stared blankly at him. Daniel, misinterpreting her silence, continued, his voice imbued with a hopeful, almost pleading urgency. We could live in the city, or somewhere quiet, if you prefer. We could travel, see places you've only read about. You could learn to drive, wear what you wish, choose your own path. We could start fresh, Alara. Just us. Imagine it. He painted a vivid picture. Sun-drenched mornings, shared laughter, quiet evenings under unfamiliar stars. His vision was intoxicating. A siren song promising freedom and a love unbound. But as he spoke, Alara saw not the glittering promise, but the gaping chasm it would create. She saw Sarah's heartbroken face, Jakob's quiet disappointment, the empty space she would leave at the supper table. She saw the condemnation in the eyes of her community, the whispers, the unspoken judgments. She felt the chill of isolation, the profound loneliness of cutting ties so deeply ingrained they felt like extensions of her own being. Daniel, she finally managed, her voice a reedy whisper, barely audible above the tumultuous din in her head. I cannot. The words were an automatic reflex, a desperate attempt to cling to the familiar, to push back against the overwhelming tide. He looked crestfallen, his hope dimming. Why not, Alara? Don't you feel it too? This connection between us? She did. Oh, she did. The yearning in her heart was a raw, aching wound. But the path he offered was paved with the shards of everything she had ever known. Everything she was supposed to be. How could she choose between the love that pulsed through her veins, a love that felt as new and vital as spring rain, and the ancient, enduring loyalty that ran through the very marrow of her bones? Her mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of images. Daniel's tender smile, her mother's comforting hand, the joyous ring of the church bells, the thrilling press of Daniel's lips. Each image pulled her in a different direction, tearing at the delicate balance within her. The impossible choice, which had lurked like a shadow at the edges of her awareness, now stood before her, stark and demanding. She felt herself teetering on the edge, one foot in each world, unable to move, unable to breathe. The precipice beckoned, a tearful goodbye. The cool night air, typically a solace, pressed in like a shroud as Alara knelt by her narrow bed. The familiar scents of lavender and beeswax, usually grounding, now carried a faint, unsettling edge of melancholy. Her hands, toughened by years of farm labor, trembled as she clasped them, not in rote prayer, but in raw, visceral desperation. Words wouldn't form. Instead, a torrent of pleas, for strength, for absolution, for clarity, choked in her throat. She envisioned the bishop's stern, unyielding gaze, the quiet disappointment shadowing Jakob's face, the profound, heartbroken confusion on Sarah's. And Mama, Papa. How could she inflict this upon them? Yet, Daniel's image, his earnest eyes, the gentle brush of his hand, flickered behind her lids, a steadfast beacon against the storm. A silent, quickly stifled sob escaped, muffled against the rough cotton of her nightdress. Her decision, forged in the intensity of Daniel's heartfelt plea, had solidified in the quiet solitude of this night. She would leave. The enormity of it bore down on her, a physical weight. She was trading everything familiar, every facet of her identity, for a future she couldn't fully grasp, with a man whose world was utterly foreign. Was this courage, or a foolish, reckless abandon? She didn't know. only the aching void in her chest, a chasm that had grown too vast to ignore at the thought of life without Daniel, offered a perverse clarity. Pushing herself upright, Ilara moved through the cherished contours of her home. The old floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet, a sound usually so comforting, now a prelude to betrayal. In the main room, the embers in the wood stove pulsed faintly, a single crimson eye observing her silent progress. Her fingers traced the smooth, worn wood of the kitchen table, a silent witness to countless meals shared, endless stories spun. She remembered Anna, her youngest sister, giggling, eyes bright with mischief, as she tried to snatch a piece of bread before Grace. A sharp, sudden pang pierced her heart. She wouldn't witness Anna's blossoming. She wouldn't be present for Sarah's future joys or heartbreaks. She paused at the threshold of the girls' shared room. Sarah lay curled, a faint smile gracing her lips, perhaps dreaming of Caleb from the Miller farm. Ilara's breath hitched. She pictured Sarah's awakening, the slow dawning of her absence, the frantic searching, the eventual, crushing understanding. Tears welled, blurring Sarah's innocent features. With a trembling hand, Ilara reached out, almost touching Sarah's soft hair, then recoiled. A touch now would be a final farewell, and she couldn't bear to make it real, not yet. Next, she crept into her parents' room. Papa's steady breathing filled the quiet space, a deep, reassuring rhythm. Mama, typically a light sleeper, was lost in slumber beside him. Ilara envisioned their faces in the morning, etched with confusion, then sorrow, then perhaps anger. The thought was unbearable, but she pushed it down. She had to be strong. For Daniel. For herself. Back in her small room, moonlight spilled through the window, painting silver stripes across the patchwork quilt. Her wooden sewing box sat on the dresser, its lid slightly ajar, a half-finished sampler peeking out. A simple floral design she'd begun for Mama's birthday. It would never be completed by her hand. Her plain dresses hung neatly in the wardrobe, a uniform she would soon shed. Every object, every thread, every knot in the floorboards seemed to whisper of the life she was abandoning. She sat on the edge of her bed, tracing the worn pattern of the quilt. This bed, this room, had cradled her childhood dreams, her youthful anxieties, and now, the crushing weight of her impossible decision. It was here she had first felt the stirrings of a world beyond the farm's fences, within the pages of a borrowed book, in the casual glance of an English tourist. And it was here, tonight, that she would leave it all behind. A final, deep breath, tasting of wood smoke and unshed tears. She smoothed the quilt one last time, a silent farewell to the comfort and familiarity it embodied. The choice was made. The sun would soon crest the horizon, and with it, a new life, terrifying and exhilarating, would begin. The parting storm. The first blush of dawn painted the window in faint rose and grey when Ilara finally rose. Sarah, still lost in the deep slumber of childhood, lay curled in her bed, a soft sigh escaping her lips. Ilara watched her, a sharp pang hitting her chest. Her sister would wake to a world irrevocably altered, a world where Ilara no longer belonged. The thought was a physical ache, a tearing at the fabric of her very being. She tiptoed through the hushed house, the floorboards groaning beneath her weight like old bones. Her mother, Sarah, was already in the kitchen, the rhythmic clatter of dishes a familiar morning sound. The aroma of brewing coffee and simmering oatmeal filled the air, a scent that had been the backdrop to every morning of Ilara's life. It suddenly felt like a ghost, a memory already fading. "Ma'am." Ilara's voice was a whisper, a fragile thing that barely cut through the kitchen's quiet industry. Her mother turned, her face etched with the early lines of a life of hard work, but softening with maternal warmth. "Morning, dearest. You're up early." Her eyes, usually so observant, held no premonition. Ilara's breath hitched. She had rehearsed this 100 times in her mind. each time the words dissolving into tears. Now, standing before her mother, they felt impossibly heavy, like stones in her throat. "Ma'am, I'm leaving." The clatter of a spoon against a bowl was the only sound for a long moment. Then the spoon dropped, hitting the wooden floor with a startling echo. Sarah's face drained of colour, her eyes, usually so gentle, now wide with a dawning horror. "Leaving? What? What do you mean, leaving?" Her voice was barely audible, a fragile whisper that mirrored Ilara's own earlier attempt. "I'm going with Daniel," Ilara managed, her voice cracking. The name, spoken aloud, felt like a betrayal. Sarah swayed, grasping the edge of the counter as if to steady herself against an unseen blow. Tears welled in her eyes, silent at first, then flowing freely, tracing paths down her weathered cheeks. "No, Ilara, my sweet girl, no. You cannot. This is madness." Her hands reached out, trembling, clutching Ilara's arms. "Think, child. Think of what you are giving up. Your home, your family, your faith. For a man you barely know." "I love him, ma'am," Ilara confessed, the words a desperate plea for understanding. Her own tears joined her mother's, a shared river of grief. "Love?" Sarah's voice broke, a raw, guttural sound that tore at Ilara's heart. "What kind of love makes you abandon everything sacred? Is his love worth breaking your mother's heart, your father's, your sister's?" She pulled Ilara into a fierce embrace, her arms surprisingly strong, holding her as if she could physically prevent her departure. "Please, Ilara, don't do this. Stay. We will make it right. We will find you a good Amish man, a life here, a proper life." Her voice was a desperate symphony of pleading and sorrow, her tears soaking Ilara's shawl. Ilara clung to her mother, the scent of lavender and starch a bittersweet comfort. "I can't, ma'am. My heart. It won't let me." The words were true, but they felt inadequate, hollow against the vast ocean of her mother's pain. She felt a profound sense of loss, not just for herself, but for the life she was shattering for her parents. Later, as the sun began its slow ascent, painting the kitchen in hues of gold, Ilara knew she had to face her father. Jakob was in the barn, the rhythmic thud of his axe splitting firewood echoing through the crisp morning air. She walked towards the sound, each step heavy, a condemned woman approaching her fate. He stood with his back to her, his broad shoulders squared against the world, his movements precise and powerful. The scent of pine and sweat clung to him. Ilara stopped a few feet away, her shadow falling across his work. He paused, the axe held aloft, then slowly lowered it, the blade sinking into the chopping block with a soft thud. He didn't turn. "Dat," Ilara whispered, the single word thick with sorrow. Jakob remained silent, his back still to her, his posture rigid. The air between them crackled with unspoken words, with years of shared history, with the weight of her decision. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hand as he finally placed the axe against the block. He drew a slow, shuddering breath. Finally, he turned. His face was a mask of sorrow. His eyes, usually so stern yet filled with an unspoken affection, now held a deep, profound disappointment that cut Ilara to her core. There were no tears, no shouts, only a quiet, shattering grief that resonated more deeply than any outburst. He looked at her, then past her, as if seeing a future that no longer included her. He didn't speak a single word, but his silence was a roaring torrent of pain, a condemnation more absolute than any sermon. Ilara met his gaze, her own eyes brimming, pleading for forgiveness he couldn't offer, understanding he couldn't give. In that moment, she saw not just her father, but the patriarch of a lineage she was abandoning, the keeper of traditions she was forsaking. His silent suffering was a brand on her soul, a constant reminder of the profound cost of her freedom. The barn, usually a place of simple, honest labor, now felt like a tomb, filled with the ghosts of what might have been, stepping into the unknown. The small satchel felt impossibly heavy in Ilara's hand, though it contained little more than her most cherished embroidery, a worn German hymnal, and a single change of clothes. Each step away from the warm lamplight spilling from her kitchen window felt like a betrayal, a severance. The familiar crunch of gravel beneath her plain boots usually brought a sense of peace, a connection to the well-trodden paths of her life. Tonight, it sounded like a drumbeat of departure, each beat echoing the finality of her choice. The air, crisp and clear, held the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, aromas that had always been synonymous with home, with belonging. Now, they were tinctured with the sharp tang of loss. She didn't run, didn't hurry. Every fiber of her being urged her to slow, to draw out these last few moments in the world she was abandoning. Her silhouette, stark against the emerging sliver of moon, moved steadily down the lane, the rhythm of her departure almost a ritual. The barn, a hulking shadow to her left, seemed to hold its breath, its usual animal sounds hushed by the late hour. The gentle lowing of the cows, the rustle of straw, all were muted, as if the very landscape mourned with her. She reached the edge of the property, where the gravel road met the paved county road, a stark boundary in more ways than one. A dark shape waited there, a silent sentinel that both promised and threatened. Daniel's car. Its sleek, modern lines stood in stark contrast to the simple, horse-drawn buggies that usually lined this stretch. It hummed with a quiet power, a promise of speed, of distance, of a future utterly alien to her past. She turned then, a final, wrenching pivot. Her gaze swept over the farmhouse, its whitewashed walls softened by the dim light, the porch swing swaying almost imperceptibly in the night breeze. Every window was a dark eye, reflecting back her own anguish. She imagined her mother, Sarah, still weeping softly in the kitchen, her father, Jacob, sitting rigid in his armchair, the weight of his silence a physical burden even from afar. The vision squeezed her heart, a brutal ache that threatened to buckle her knees. And then she saw her, a smaller, fainter outline near the edge of the garden, half hidden by the fading stalks of corn. Anna, her youngest sister, a wisp of a girl who usually followed Ilara like a shadow, her bright eyes alight with admiration and curiosity. Even from this distance, Ilara could feel the raw, unadulterated grief emanating from her. Anna's small frame trembled, a silent testament to the devastation Ilara was leaving behind. Ilara knew, with a certainty that pierced her soul, that Anna was crying, her face streaked with tears, her heart broken not just for her own loss, but for the sister who was choosing a path of sorrow and exile. A wave of overwhelming guilt washed over Ilara, so potent it stole her breath. Anna, with her innocent questions about the world beyond the fences, her eagerness to learn, her boundless affection. What kind of sister abandoned her? Who would braid her hair in the mornings? Who would share her secrets and dreams under the vast Amish sky? Ilara closed her eyes for a fleeting second, picturing Anna's future. A future without her, one shaped by the absence she was creating. The image was a sharp, burning brand on her conscience. The car door opened, a soft click breaking the suffocating silence. Daniel. His presence was a beacon, a quiet strength that she desperately needed. She couldn't see his face clearly in the dim light, but she felt his steady gaze, a silent invitation to step into the unknown. With a final, desperate wrench, Ilara tore her gaze from Anna, from the weeping house, from the life she had known. She walked towards the car, each step heavier than the last, her small satchel swinging like a pendulum, counting down the end of her old world. The door opened wider, a silent beckoning into the darkness, into the roar of an engine that would carry her away. She climbed in, the scent of new leather and something distinctly English enveloping her. She didn't look back again. The door closed with a soft thud, a definitive punctuation mark on the end of her Amish life. A world of noise and loneliness. The city assaulted Ilara's senses the moment Daniel's car idled at a traffic light. A cacophony of blaring horns, the rumble of unseen engines, and a strange, high-pitched whine from an overhead wire braided into a relentless wave of sound that vibrated through the very seat beneath her. It was a stark contrast to the gentle symphony of chirping crickets and rustling leaves that had lulled her to sleep for 23 years. She clutched the small satchel on her lap, its familiar weight a meager anchor in this ocean of noise. Daniel's apartment, though tidy, felt like a labyrinth of foreign objects. The refrigerator hummed with an insistent mechanical drone, a jarring counterpoint to the quiet cool of their root cellar. The television, a dark, silent rectangle in the corner, seemed to pulse with a dormant energy. He showed her the unfamiliar controls for the shower, a bewildering array of knobs and levers, explaining the concept of a water heater as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For Ilara, accustomed to the simple pump in the yard and a sun-warmed pail, it was another facet of this incomprehensible new existence. The first few days blurred into a disorienting haze. Daniel, ever patient, tried to explain the intricacies of a microwave, the bewildering choices in a grocery store aisle that stretched further than any barn she'd ever seen. She felt a profound embarrassment at her ignorance, a childlike helplessness she resented. Even the simple act of choosing an outfit became an ordeal. Her plain blue dress, once a symbol of her belonging, now marked her as an outsider in a world of vibrant, varied fabrics and perplexing cuts. Daniel had gently suggested they buy her some new clothes, an offer that brought a fresh wave of guilt. Each new item felt like another thread snipped from her past. The silence, when it came, was even more jarring than the noise. The absence of children's laughter echoing from the fields, the clatter of dishes from a shared kitchen, the murmur of prayers from her family's gathering. Here, the quiet of the apartment pressed in on her, a vast, echoing emptiness. Daniel was often at work, leaving her alone with her thoughts, which inevitably drifted back to Anna's tear-streaked face, to her mother's silent anguish. The vibrant colors of the city outside her window seemed to mock her internal grayness. One afternoon, Daniel found her sitting by the window, staring out at the ceaseless flow of traffic, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She hadn't heard him enter. He knelt beside her, his hand gently covering hers. "What is it, Ilara?" he asked, his voice soft, laced with a concern that tightened her chest. "It's so much," she whispered, her voice rough. "So many people, so much vastness, and so very much alone." He pulled her into a hug, her head resting against his shoulder. He understood, without her needing to elaborate, the chasm she was trying to bridge. He knew her loneliness wasn't about his absence, but the absence of an entire world. He stroked her hair, a silent promise that he would be her anchor. Yet, even in his loving embrace, she felt the profound weight of her choice, the irreversible rupture. The love she felt for Daniel was a powerful current, but it was pulling her into uncharted waters, leaving behind the comforting, if restrictive, shores of her past. She was a stranger in a strange land, and the joy she had anticipated was often eclipsed by a pervasive, aching solitude. Unanswered echoes. The urban air, sharp with exhaust and damp pavement, did little to dispel the haze in Ilara's mind. Days blurred into weeks, each one a relentless wave of novelty that left her gasping and adrift. The city's constant thrum, once a bewildering din, had settled into a dull ache behind her ears, a perpetual reminder of the quiet fields and the gentle clatter of buggies she'd left behind. One afternoon, a profound, almost physical ache for connection propelled her to Daniel's compact, uncluttered desk. She retrieved a blank sheet of paper, its stark white a jarring contrast to the familiar, cream-colored stationery of her former life. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen, a sleek metal instrument that felt foreign compared to the sturdy wooden pencils she was accustomed to. "Are you all right, Elara?" Daniel's voice, a steadying presence, reached her from the kitchen where he was preparing a simple lunch. I need to write," she managed, her voice reedy. She didn't look up, her gaze fixed on the pristine page as if it held all the answers she desperately sought. A fragile hope, like a thread of spider silk, intertwined with crushing apprehension. She understood the risks, the unspoken decree, but the thought of permanent silence, of simply vanishing from their lives, was a wound that festered. With painstaking care, she began to write, each word a heavy stone laid upon a path she wasn't sure even existed anymore. She spoke of her devotion to Daniel, the city's overwhelming scale, her profound solitude. She offered no plea for absolution. She simply laid bare her truth, a raw, unvarnished confession for eyes she prayed would perceive it not as treachery, but as an entreaty for understanding. She sealed the envelope with a faint tremor, the adhesive a strange tang on her tongue. The mailbox, a cold metal maw on the corner, seemed to devour her last vestige of hope. Days stretched into a desolate expanse. Each morning, Ilara's first act was to check the small, cluttered entryway table for a reply. The mail slot remained stubbornly inert, yielding only junk and Daniel's bills. The city's relentless tempo, once a source of frantic energy, now felt like a mocking backdrop to her stalled existence. She'd watched children playing in the park below their window, their carefree laughter a stark counterpoint to the tightening knot in her chest. Daniel, sensing the deepening gloom that shadowed her once luminous eyes, tried to fill the silence with his quiet companionship. He'd bring her cups of herbal tea, suggest strolls through tranquil city enclaves, and read aloud from books, his voice a soothing balm against her rising despair. Yet, he recognized the void she truly yearned to bridge. One evening, as the streetlights flickered to life, painting long shadows across their apartment, Elara sat by the window, her gaze lost in the urban tapestry. Her shoulders slumped, a picture of utter desolation. "They haven't written back," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sirens. It wasn't a question, but a statement of heartbreaking certainty. The confirmation, though anticipated, struck her with the force of a physical blow. The silence resonated louder than any scolding, colder than any sermon. It was the sound of a door closing, irrevocably. They had chosen to ostracize her. Daniel knelt beside her, his hand gently covering hers. Her fingers were cold, lifeless. "Elara," he began, his voice thick with a pain that mirrored her own. He saw the shimmering film of unshed tears in her eyes, reflecting the kaleidoscope of city lights. A fierce pang of guilt seized him, knowing his love was the genesis of this profound rupture. "I am so sorry. I know this hurts." She finally turned, her eyes, usually so clear, clouded with an unbearable sorrow. "I knew it was a possibility," she said, the words catching in her throat. "But to know they truly see me as gone." Her voice trailed off, a sob escaping before she could stifle it. The cost of her independence, once an abstract concept, had solidified into a tangible, suffocating weight. Daniel pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the faint scent of lavender that still clung to her. "You are not gone, Elara," he murmured against her temple, his voice firm with a conviction he hoped would reach her shattered heart. "You are here, with me, and I will never leave you. This life, it's ours now, and we will build it, brick by beautiful brick, together." He held her as the unanswered echoes of her past reverberated through the quiet apartment, vowing silently that he would be her unwavering anchor in this new, bewildering world. The quilt of hope. Months bled into seasons, each bringing a subtle shift in Elara's world. The initial jarring cacophony of the city slowly softened, becoming a background hum rather than an assault. Daniel, ever patient, had encouraged her to explore, to find small anchors in this vast, unfamiliar ocean. She discovered a quiet corner in the public library, its towering shelves a labyrinth of stories she'd never known existed. The scent of old paper and ink became a comforting aroma, replacing the earthy smell of the barn and the sweet fragrance of sun-dried linens. She spent hours there, not just reading, but observing the diverse tapestry of faces, each lost in their own world, yet sharing a common space. Daniel also introduced her to a community garden project, a small patch of green nestled between brick buildings. Though different from the expansive fields of her past, the feel of soil beneath her fingertips, the careful tending of nascent sprouts, brought a familiar solace. She learned the names of new herbs, their vibrant colors and pungent aromas, a fresh symphony for her senses. It was here, amongst the blossoming tomatoes and fragrant basil, that she sometimes felt a fleeting sense of peace. A whisper of the life she'd left behind, but without the suffocating weight of expectation. Despite these nascent joys, the hollow ache in her chest persisted. One evening, as Daniel hummed softly while preparing supper, Ilara watched the city lights twinkle outside their apartment window. Do you think they ever talk about me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper against the gentle clatter of pots. Daniel paused, his back to her, then turned, his expression softening. He moved to her, pulling her close. The scent of him, clean laundry, and the faint aroma of the spices he'd been using, a grounding presence. "I don't know, Ilara, but I know they must think of you. You're their daughter." She leaned into him, the warmth of his embrace a temporary balm. "It's just to be completely erased, as if I never existed. It's a strange kind of pain, Daniel, to be alive, yet dead to those you loved most." A tear traced a path down her cheek, warm and swift. "Sometimes I miss the quiet. Not just the quiet of the fields, but the quiet understanding that ran between us. The unspoken things." He held her tighter, his chin resting on her hair. "I know it hurts, my love. And I'm sorry. I wish I could take that pain away from you. But we're building something new here, Ilara. Something strong. And you're not erased. You're right here, vibrant and alive. And you're my world." The calendar turned, marking a full year since her desperate flight. The anniversary passed largely unmarked, a silent acknowledgement of a day filled with both terror and exhilaration. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, as Ilara sorted through the day's mail, mostly bills and advertisements, a small, unassuming package lay nestled amongst them. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a simple string, and the address was written in a familiar, slightly shaky hand. Her breath hitched. The postal mark was from Lancaster County. Her fingers trembled as she untied the string, her heart hammering against her ribs. Inside, nestled carefully, was a quilt. Not a large, intricate piece, but a small, lap-sized square, perhaps 20 inches by 20, intricately stitched. The colors were muted, familiar shades of deep indigo, forest green, and a soft, sun-faded cream, colors she recognized from her mother's fabric scraps. Each tiny stitch was perfect, a testament to hours of meticulous work. A silent language only she could understand. She ran her hand over the soft cotton, the raised texture of the quilting a delicate landscape beneath her fingertips. A small, almost imperceptible patch, a miniature scarlet tulip, was embroidered near the corner. Sarah. Her mother. The tulip. Her mother's favorite flower, a secret emblem of their shared garden back home. A sob escaped her, raw and wrenching, a year's worth of unspoken grief and longing erupting. Daniel, hearing her cry from the next room, rushed in, his face etched with concern. He found her on the floor, the small quilt clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Not of sorrow, but of a profound, fragile hope. It wasn't a letter, no words to read, no voice to hear. But it was something more, a tangible thread, re-stitched across the chasm of their separation, a silent, enduring testament to a love that, despite everything, had not been completely severed. Freedom and its price. The quilt unfurled in her grasp, a rich tableau of muted blues, deep greens and creamy whites. Each careful stitch seemed to whisper tales from a life long gone. Ilara's finger traced the familiar geometry of a log cabin square, a pattern her mother had favored. This wasn't a jubilant design, but one that spoke volumes of quiet fortitude, enduring comfort, and resilience. The fabric, silken with age, exhaled a faint, almost imperceptible trace of lavender, mingled with the distinct earthy aroma of their old farmhouse attic, a scent that both constricted her chest and brought a strange peace. More than mere cloth, it was a tangible fragment of her past, a bridge spanning the divide to her present. She draped it carefully over the sofa's back, its unexpected weight a grounding presence in their sleek, modern apartment. The city's ubiquitous hum seemed to fade, replaced by the ghost of her mother's song as she sewed. A year prior, such a gift would have felt like a cruel jest from a family that had otherwise erased her. Now, it was a delicate offering, a testament to a love that, despite everything, refused to fully wither. Ilara moved to the window, the quilt a silent anchor behind her. Below, the street pulsed with urban life, hurried cars, animated phone calls, the distant keen of a siren. It was a world utterly alien to the hushed fields and gentle rhythms of her youth. Here, she dressed as she pleased, spoke her mind fearlessly, and shared her life with the man she loved, free from communal judgment. This was the liberation she had yearned for, a vibrant, sometimes overwhelming freedom, both sweet and sharp on her tongue. The price had been steep. Her family, her faith. The only home she'd known, all laid bare on the altar of her own desires. She often wondered if her name ever crossed their lips, if her younger siblings recalled the bedtime stories she spun, the games they played as twilight deepened. Their silence remained a raw wound, a phantom throb that sometimes surfaced unbidden. She acknowledged the pain she had inflicted, the ripple she had sent through their tranquil existence. Their heartbreak was a heavy weight, one she carried with every independent breath. Yet, as she turned back to the quilt, a new sensation blossomed within her, a quiet, resolute strength. She was not the same Ilara who had fled under cover of darkness, trembling with a desperate, fragile hope. The city had reshaped her, in some ways hardening, in others softening. She had mastered bus routes, learned to order coffee without a blush, and offered smiles to strangers. She'd found work at a small bakery, the scent of warm bread, a comforting echo of simpler times, yet distinctly her own creation. She was constructing a life, stitch by careful stitch, much like her mother built quilts. Daniel found her there that evening, his hand a gentle weight on her shoulder. He followed her gaze to the quilt, his eyes softening with understanding. More than anyone, he grasped the intricate emotional tapestry it represented. He had been her steadfast support through the turbulent waters of her transformation, his patience an endless spring, his love a constant, unwavering flame. "It's beautiful, Ilara," he murmured, his voice low and warm. "She truly loves you." Tears pricked Ilara's eyes, but they weren't solely tears of sorrow. They were tears of recognition, of relief, of a fledgling hope she hadn't dared to nurture. She leaned into his touch, finding deep solace in his unwavering presence. The future remained an uncharted territory, a vast, unstitched canvas. She couldn't know if reconciliation with her family was possible, if the chasm between their worlds would ever close. But clutching the hope this quilt embodied, and holding Daniel's hand, one truth resonated with absolute certainty. She was no longer alone. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead, weaving their own story, thread by thread.